Australia is importing shiploads of timber. Shiploads. Importing it. Why? Why, when we have vast forests of perfectly great timber here for the taking, are we doing that? Bastiaan is a director of the Forestry and Wood Communities Group, which advocates for the manufacturing of timber and building industry in Australia. You can just imagine the battles he has against green absolutists. Marcus, welcome to the program. You also run a major door manufacturing business with factories in Victoria and Queensland, but you say it's getting harder and harder to get access to local timber. Why is this?
Chris, thanks for having us on. Mate, the problem is that the policy, the policy decisions, particularly the left wing of the Labor Party and the activist Green movement, have shut down our logging industry in a number of states in Australia. The worst case is Victoria, where a staple of the industry for the last 200 years, so far as in building construction, Victorian ash was banned. The logging of it was banned from native forests at the start of 2024. At the moment, there's a war going on in New South Wales over timber production on the North Coast as well. These are major industries in each of these states, and Victoria was worth about 1.4 to 1.6 billion a year, and in New South Wales it's 2.9 to 3 billion a year.
Wow.
Now, these industries, the industry in Victoria was shut down, and in New South Wales there's a war at the moment to try and expand a national park, this Great Koala National Park. But there's no room in this sort of green left ideology for any industry-based existence within forestry. So you've got mills that have been shut down right along the coast through litigation, and the forestry controller, which has also been under siege, has been losing money in a major way because of the litigation undertaken by these green lobby groups.
So what's their argument when they turn up into the Land and Environment Court armed with green lawyers? What is their argument as to why you should have instantly shut down a timber plant and a forested area that you have harvested for many, many decades? What's the reason given for you being ordered to do so?
Well, the reason is this sort of this environmental push, the crusade of the Green Left since the late 70s. We saw it in Tasmania. It moved to the mainland with Bob Brown and the Greens Party nationally. But they want to end all native timber harvesting. They actually don't reflect on the science or the capacity for timber harvesting and the operations to reduce our fire risk, to improve biodiversity, the billions of dollars of revenue, having native timber or timber sovereignty. Those things don't concern them. Ultimately, it comes down to an ideological push to ensure that forests are not touched.
Untouched, yes. They remain untouched, including no hazard reduction either, so that when we get to a very dry part of our weather cycle, they can all just blow up in smoke and fire and flames.
Well, that is a major issue, because you've got mega fires now that are of a much greater imperilment to native species, flora and fauna. Just by reference, from 1990 to 2010, there was a reduction of about 30% of the koalas in northern New South Wales. Some of that was to do with development, some of that was to do with biological reasons. But when the bushfires came through a matter of years ago, it knocked out a further 70% of the population. So a season of bushfires did more damage, more than double the amount of damage than 20 years of so-called harvesting impact.
And yet the Greenies will claim and scream that this is because of climate change, too much CO2 in the air. But the fact of the matter is you keep your forests untouched. I guess if you make sure that they are off limits to recreational users and off limits to even professionals for hazard reduction, you're creating a bigger inferno.
You are. And I mean, the forestry industry has paid for a lot of the very good stuff that happens in our native forests across Australia.
Like what?
The regeneration work, the management of invasive species, the fact that a lot of Australians enjoy the bush. They camp, they fish, they hike. Those things will now come at a cost.
Yeah.
If you don't have a multi-billion-dollar industry which is underwriting the management and leisure activities within our regions, you're going to have to find that payment at the park gate.
Yep.
The lock-up and leave isn't working. The science on what is going on in Victoria is not being heeded by the New South Wales Green Movement. There is a little bright spark, which fortunately organisations have been able to lobby and speak to across the Labor Party and the union movement to ministers and politicians, and ensure that there is a recognition of all the merits of the industry. And despite the fact that many mills and suppliers and people in the sort of value chain in New South Wales are having a hard time, we are generally optimistic nationally that there will be a positive output or the positive outcome in New South Wales. But it shouldn't come to this. This is a major national industry that does the heavy lifting in our regions, both economically, so far as employing people, certainly nationally for the construction industry. And we're fighting to survive in a period when people are saying the costs of homes are too expensive, we need to build more.
Well, that was my next question. If I wanted to build a new home and I came to a builder and I said, I want this sort of timber, and he had to import that timber, the cost of my house has to go up. You're importing the timber, and of course importing costs are added extras.
Well, not to mention the so-called carbon emissions. To get a piece of timber from Latin America to Australia is a far more costly exercise than it is to cut it in our backyard, to mill it and then have it finished. But what's happened is Australia is a fascinating instance where Australia has a timber species called Eucalyptus grandis. We've been growing it on the north coast before we got here. And what happened in the 1960s and 70s is in Latin America, thousands of hectares of stands were planted of this timber. The Latin Americans are now cutting this timber down, they're processing it, and they're selling it back to us in packs. So you get that Australian hardwood, which is from Australia.
This is madness.
It's insane.
Insane.
Relying upon this timber to have select grade, select finish hardwood products. That's doors, staircases, flooring, furniture, because we cannot get supply on native Australian hardwoods. And even if we are getting supply on native Australian hardwoods, the price has gone up by 30%, in some cases 60 to 70% on select grade blackbutt, spotted gum, and select Tasmanian oak.
And I guess the problem is politically is you've got a government in office where the ministers who make these major decisions are far closer to the green camp than they are to the rural camp, because none of them have got any rural experience.
Well, there's an advocate for every koala in Australia. There's not an advocate for every timber mill or timber joinery business in Australia.
Well said.
The focus of the political class has been on the noisy activists for too long in this industry, like many others. Yeah. And overall, the country suffers because our cost of product goes up and our manufacturing base diminishes.
And yet, behind the scenes, where the timber industry still operates, you people are doing and going to great lengths to ensure that areas are rehabilitated and that other areas have growth that can be used for harvesting down the track, right?
Absolutely. So Timber New South Wales, which is a job representing the industry in New South Wales, done a lot of work trying to make the case to government and has been successful, highlights all of this. The point is that the industry loves forestry. They love the forest. They ensure that in 80 years' time, a stand is ready to harvest again. This is a completely renewable product, which sequesters carbon and fundamentally is essential for building and construction. Yeah. But it underwrites the cost of managing our forests and the cost of managing the risk around fire.
Yeah. It's a no-brainer, this stuff. But, of course, they're such absolutists, the Greenies who are trying to bring down the industry, Marcus. They're absolutists, so it's either their way or no way.
It is. Do you know what's fascinating? I mean, the furor in New South Wales about koalas. Everybody loves koalas. But ultimately, the science will tell you that koalas, so far as in their habitats and their breeding and where you find them, they like young eucalyptus, so plants that are growing. The old growth trees are not nearly as nourishing as the new growth trees.
Right.
There's been a very interesting survey quite recently which has found that across a range of different environments, some that have been felled, some that have been harvested, some that haven't, the koala population was fairly even. And that flies directly in the face of what has been sort of the common mythology that there's a sort of koala killing machine going on around Coffs Harbour and that sort of north coast. And it's simply not true. But the facts and the science cannot permeate the argument because the activists are so well politically positioned and so capable of sharing their narrative to a lot of people who, frankly, for all decent purposes, are very concerned about our flora and fauna, and obviously don't want to see an Australian legend become extinct.
But there's a middle ground, and this is the middle ground that we've got to convince the public should be sought by politicians in particular. Great to have you on the program, Marcus. We'll keep across all of this because as we import more timber, people pay bigger prices to build stuff, and that shouldn't be the impasse that the community faces. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Chris.
Good on you, Marcus Bastiaan, Director of the Forestry and Wood Communities Group. Yeah, they destroyed the timber industry in socialist Victoria. They did well there. They're on their way to destroy the salmon industry in Tasmania. Who cares about the 5,000 jobs? And they're now have in their targets the New South Wales timber industry as well. And as Marcus says, the lock up and leave it strategy is pure ideology.